Shatterline's Expedition is a free-to-play 3-player co-op where you fight through random events and enemies while trying to complete 3 primary objectives, so you can fight one of the 2 bosses currently available. In this video, I'll teach you some tricks and tell you who I think is the best characters, the best perks, and the best weapons in order to help you in your future expeditions. First, let's get into the characters. Orbit's ult is the only thing decent about him. Strix's minigun and walls are decent, but other characters perform better. Briss's ult and invisibility is pretty nice. Again, other characters does what she does kind of better. Malva is very good if you struggle with Research Station, as well as just keeping your team alive or stalling during the end fight, so one of your teammates can respawn. But other than that, I don't really recommend any of them. And now in A tier, we have Pill. Unlike in PvP, Pill is actually very good in PvE. His freeze grenade is good for killing adamants and gardeners, as well as freezing a group of enemies to either run by them or mow them down. His med drone is super useful for general survival and making sure your squad doesn't get wiped. And his ult is super good against the Stilt and other bigger enemies. Next, let's get into the 2 best characters for Expedition, Kite and Ram. Surprisingly, Ram is amazing for Expedition. His axes do a lot of damage, potentially even one-shotting the adamants if you hit the sweet spot, and they are good for killing the little guys while you're running by them. His F ability is really only good for blasting the ball lightning into the stratosphere, rendering that event basically meaningless, as well as you can use his F ability to launch the lightning orb into the generator, but be careful, because if you miss, it'll bounce, and you'll have to wait to spawn another one. Kite is kind of busted. His mine is crazy good at killing groups of enemies, adamants, breaking the Stilt's shield, skipping the event with the little legs that you have to break, blowing up the exokick doors, and skipping the behemoth's first stage. With Kite on the team, there's really nothing off the table. With his walls, he can split the attention of all the little guys, get the whole team up on a recon spot without having to kick the boxes down. He can also get you into this little safe spot on the sample task. While anything with projectiles can still get you, this spot is good for whenever the sample task is over and it spawns a lot of enemies. Just sit up there and kill all the ranged enemies and then wait for the mission to be over. Kite's ult is also crazy good for fighting the Stilt, skipping the ball and generally doing a lot of damage to anything he wants to kill. Now let's talk about the perks. There's a lot of them. At the top of S tier, we have the best perk, Feedback Loop. This perk is absolutely broken for almost every character. It gives basically infinite meds on Malva, super fast recharging mines on Kite, the ability to almost permanently freeze an enemy with Pill. Feedback Loop is overall just amazing. Next is Strife. This perk is also crazy good. The ability to pick a target and shoot a couple of pistol bullets at it to convert it to your teammate for a while is really good. And once he's done going sicko, he dies. This perk is very good all around. Now the chargers are a bit weird. If you have Feedback Loop, you don't really need any chargers, but they are crazy good if you're popping your ult frequently. And some variation of chargers are needed for almost every single expedition run. Lastly in S tier is Legendary Increased Health, which puts you at 225 HP. It's very nice for general survivability, especially if your enemies have the increased melee damage. Now to start us off in A tier, the Epic Chargers. Again, it's crazy good if you're in need of a charger, but not much else to say. After those, we have Emergency System, a very good survival perk for whenever you're close to dying. It pushes all the enemies away from you and stops all bullets from hitting you, so you can heal and kill whatever is shooting at you. I'd put Freezing Touch here as well, but I don't have the picture of the perk simply because it's kind of like Pill in a perk. Homing missiles are next. I love this perk. Every time you shoot something, it has a chance to launch a little missile that does a bit of damage. It's very good for killing big groups of enemies. Now, weapon backpacks are also kind of weird, in the sense that some guns don't really need them. But if you have a weapon that needs a weapon backpack, the legendary version basically won't let you run out of ammo. Counter Discharge. You may be thinking, how is a common perk this high on the tier list? Well, it's simply because of how many times it has saved my life. It's crazy helpful. In B tier, again, another charger, then Laser Saw just because it's really good at killing groups of enemies. Finally, probably the biggest upset in this list, Infinite Clip and Sentry. I'm sorry to say this, but they aren't that good. They oftentimes just get you killed. They can be fun and sometimes very rewarding, but I personally stay away from these unless I'm just kind of messing around and trying to have some fun. After those, we have Scavenger, a generally good perk if there isn't something better to pick, pretty self-explanatory, and then a Marksman Charger, and then the Unstable Charger. I love this perk. If you are struggling to stay alive, I don't recommend this one, unless you have good chargers to back this one up. And finally, to end off B tier, another weapon backpack. In C tier, we have Vampiric Shot. This perk is crazy good for early to mid game if you can't find any other weapons and are still stuck with the Earl pistol. After this is Sidearm Overcharge. This perk can be used for breaking open breach doors as well as doing some really good damage to the Stilt's shield, but it's hard to get full use out of this perk, hence why it's so low on this list. The rest of this list are kind of self-explanatory. I put Slide Bomber above Primary Weapon Backpack because it's decent, but it makes you kind of have to play around it and slide around a lot. Now in F tier, the worst of the worst perks, the ones I almost never take unless there isn't another option. A backpack and then Protective Barrage. I don't think I have seen this proc ever. It seems like it would be good, but I can't say I've even seen what it does. Crystalline Souls is next, and it's a cool idea, but I don't really slide into enemies like you kind of need to in order to make this perk useful. Happy Bullet, another perk I feel like is okay, but only for some weapons. I feel like most times I get a precision kill, I end up shooting another bullet on accident, causing this perk to do absolutely nothing. And then Bloodthirsty. Again, this perk is kind of okay in very early game. Otherwise, this perk sucks. It requires you to just get up in their face, and it's not a good idea. Chrono Discharge is a very weird and kind of cool perk. Whenever you activate your ult, it freezes any nearby enemies for a bit. It's decent, but at the same time, not really. The common on-kill charger is next, and it's okay, but I'd rather have almost anything than this. Now for the two worst perks in Expedition, the Charge Knife mod and Thunderfoot. The Charge Knife mod is decent for killing stuff and stunning them. The only problem is it requires you to get into melee range, which most times will lead into your death. It's not really worth it. And Thunderfoot, the worst perk in the game. It doesn't do anything. I've never killed anything with it. I've never hurt anything with it. It's just overall bad. And now for the specific use category. These perks are really only good for certain characters or playstyles. First is Legendary Decontamination. It's really only worth taking if there isn't anything else, or you're trying to speedrun and having a little bit more time before a bad event is worth it to you. Next is Manual Therapy. This perk is horrible if you have a character that doesn't even have an ability that can kill things, but it is pretty decent on characters like Kite and Ram and kinda Malva. Otherwise, it's not that good. Here's where I'd put the primary and secondary weapon overcharge. They aren't that good unless you're using Infinite Clip or a weapon that suits that perk, but it's okay. Then we have Epic Decontamination, and finally Invigoration. I think this perk is really only good for Ram, so he can heal as he starts to fly in, so he won't die after he hits whatever he's aiming at. Now let's talk about the guns in Expedition. All of these are kind of personal preference, but in my opinion, the Presarm, Zenith, and XM40 are easily the best, especially the Presarm, because of its crazy good damage. But you kind of need a backpack with that. In A tier, we have the A3. This gun's kind of fun to use with the sheer amount of rounds you can shoot. Then we have the Springer, which I don't really recommend taking over the Earl unless there isn't a better option. After that, we have the Pacifier, being overall just decent. And then we have the A1, which is kind of decent in Expedition, but I don't really recommend it. And then the Starting Pistol, which I think is kind of underrated in Expedition. It's almost always viable until the final boss. In B tier, we have the Draken and Vector. Both are good. They just kind of need bigger mags to compete. And then the MP5 looking gun, that is really only good if you're very close to the enemy, otherwise don't take it. And then the U22 and U44, both are kind of fun to use, but they aren't that good compared to the Earl. And finally, in C tier, we have shotguns in general. I don't think you should ever take any shotgun unless you are pill or just trying to have a bit of fun and mess around. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you guys agree or disagree, feel free to let me know. And I hope you guys learned something. Thank you.